Topo Athletic is committed to lifelong health and better movement. Topo builds running shoes for those who get out there every day, regardless of weather, speed, energy, or mood. Their distinctive fit and feel combines instinctive human movement with modern performance and lightweight comfort to help you keep going, keep trying, and keep moving. Discover the Topo difference and step into a run experience unlike any other. Hey, Run Try Bike community. Welcome to the 123rd episode of the Run Try Bike Fireside Chat, part of the Everyday Athlete Podcast Network. For those of you who are joining us for the first time, the Everyday Podcast Network is a network comprised of 7 shows, including Beyond the Finish Line with Joe Harden, Running Tales with Craig Lewis, What's in Your Earbuds with Joe Harden and Om Gandhi. We also have Food Fight Friday with Adam Lee of Community Trail Running and myself, talking about foods that we are presenting to each other and what we would eat, toss, or carry while we're there. As a matter of fact, our next show is coming up on Thursday, August 29th at 2 p.m. Pacific time, and you can watch it live on Instagram, Facebook, X, YouTube, or LinkedIn. You can catch each of these shows wherever you get your podcasts, including Apple, Spotify, Amazon Music, YouTube Music, and iHeartRadio. And while you're there, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review. Today, I'm going to be joined by Dr. Paige Roberts of Roberts Neurotraining. Paige is a Colorado native living in Los Angeles who competed in sports in high school and college. She also competes today as well as helps athletes through performance neurotraining, her business. We're going to discuss how she got into neurotraining, how it helped her, and how it can help you as an endurance sports athlete. So without further ado, let's welcome Paige Roberts to the show. Hey, Paige,
Hi.
How are you?
Excellent. How are you?
I am fantastic. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join us. I know how busy you must be.
It's a pleasure, and I'm certainly grateful to get to share.
Absolutely. And for those of you who are watching the show, Paige also has an article on our website that you can check out at runtrymag.com. We'll also have another one later or we're not in September yet. So we'll have one in September, and then we'll have another one in October as well for you to check out and read. So let's get started, Paige. I want to know a little bit more about you so that our audience can get engaged with you and what you're talking about. So how did you get involved in neurotraining? What was the catalyst to get you there?
Oh, man. I've always loved sports. I loved endurance sports. I was a swimmer and runner and downhill skier and climber, rafter, all the extreme stuff that you do in the mountains in Colorado. And so I went on to study exercise science, and I was very set on getting to train or be like a sports med doctor or something within sports. And then I started working in a hospital and pursuing the master's of exercise science. And I really started to realize that a lot of the issues that individuals had physically were actually mental. And so then I started getting into like understanding the brain and understanding trauma. And so for my personal experience, I'd had a lot of stress fractures and I had some head injuries. And so I actually went and saw a clinical social worker who was doing this altered state trauma reprocessing technique. And it was really beneficial for me. So then I went down the track of getting my master's in social work so that I could do the same technique. And about the time that I was finishing up with grad school, my dad passed away from cancer, and I had left my job at the Department of Human Services. And, I felt kind of young and all of that to kind of start my own practice. And but I had another athlete friend complete suicide because my first friend, it was like 10 years later, he was the quarterback at our football team at Colorado Mesa University. And then the other friend, I had been teaching skiing with him after my dad passed, and he completed suicide the same way. He was a past college athlete as well, also an alpine skier, football player in high school, but played lacrosse in college. And so I started getting really curious with why athletes complete suicide and had already known about the trauma reprocessing technique. And so I really went on this kind of quest to figure things out and start my own practice, but do it a little differently, like really integrating in the physiology with the psychology. And so I started going to all these trainings that had to do with, at the time, the CTE and all the scare around the concussion stuff. And so I met he was the lawyer for the lead lawyer with Zimmerman and Reed, who was litigating the NFL, NHL, and NCAA. And so it kind of put me on this track of really understanding what trauma does to the brain and the body, and how like a concussion is, it's the max. It's like the worst of the worst when we talk about trauma to the body, because it's a mental and physical, and of course the brain. And so I started looking at other techniques at the time, and I got directed into the photobiomodulation light therapy concurrently that actually like detoxes the brain and stimulates the mitochondria to increase the number and size and actually heal the brain. And then I got pushed into the direction. It was he was the team doc for the U.S. ski team for years, but also for the Colorado Avalanche out of Boulder, Colorado. And he was doing this these QEEG brain scans, which you could actually see then what trauma was doing to the nervous system. And so that's where it all kind of started. And I've been doing it almost 12 years now. And yeah, so that's where performance neurotraining came from.
It's amazing. So let me ask you this. There seems to be a very personal connection between you and what you're studying to help others. Do you think if you didn't have that personal connection, you'd be as passionate about what you're doing as you are?
No, because like really when it started out, it was that like, oh yeah, I want to train athletes and I want to, sports injuries. But really once I had my own experiences with sports concussions and recovering from that, and at the time, I mean, this was 18 years ago, no one really understood some of the issues that come with concussions at this point in time, right? So not being able to sleep, having a lot of emotions, and so everyone was just kind of like, I don't know what's wrong with you, like you're healthy, you're physically healthy, everything's fine, but it's like, hey, I still can't sleep. So there was that component, and then of course just really trying to figure out why high performers do complete suicide. And some of the interesting facts around that is that 50% of people who complete suicide never sought help, never were diagnosed with anything. And then with athletes, 60% of athletes struggling with depression or anxiety don't seek help. So it's kind of this like, oh, okay, well, what's the hang up here? Is it not understanding like what's actually going on physiologically? And is that what keeps people hung up on the stigma? Or is it the method itself that isn't helpful, of like talk therapy? And so it's kind of like a, combined, all of that combined is what really prevents athletes from seeking help. So really trying to put the neuroscience to what's actually going on when we endure trauma, and that it's really just, deconditioning the maladaptation and then conditioning the brain or training the brain to get back to its optimal state before any of the trauma or the sports injuries occurred. And then really understanding too with the QEG brain scans that you go into neurodepression. So we actually see a lower voltage in the brain. So it's really depression is just decreased activity, right? So it's not this stigmatized, like, oh my gosh, you're crazy, you're a head case, something's wrong with you. It's that truly when we endure trauma, we have less energy going through the brain. So you will be depressed. And when there's an up, there's a down. So it's the really big beta theta ratio, as we'd say brainwave wise, where you're up and super anxious, down, depressed, up, super anxious, down, depressed. And so we want to bring that back down to where you were prior to any of these things occurring, which is your alpha brainwave or flow state, essentially.
You're talking a lot about trauma, and you mentioned the NFL and CTE, and so I keep going back to physical trauma, right? Concussions, getting hit and tackled in football, heading a soccer ball, getting checked in hockey, things like that. Our audience is filled with swimmers, cyclists, and runners. And sure, you can have head trauma from, a bike wreck. But how does the what you're studying and what you're working on, how would that be applied to endurance sports athletes like our audience?
Well, so it's quite interesting. So there's this MD neurologist, Dr. Robert Scar, who was out of Boulder, and he worked at this head injury clinic for his entire career. And he was one, well, we actually read the trauma spectrum back in grad school, but what he found is that it doesn't matter if it's mental or physical trauma, that we hold on to it the same way. We actually react in the same way, and it's like a shock on the nervous system. And so we take in so much information every second of every day, whether it be a physical threat or a mental, emotional threat. We just freeze for a moment, it gets stored in our nervous system, and we reset our homeostasis to a more activated hypervigilant state out of preparation of that happening again. but we take in so much information, we're not fully processing it. So that's the issue. We don't fully process things. Instead, our nervous system just resets to a homeostasis that's more high beta wave, which is more that fight, fight, freezy feeling. And so it doesn't matter if it's mental or physical, we store it the same way. So that's what's really interesting when we start looking at people's adverse childhood experiences, generational trauma, a lot of trauma that begins before the age of 12, because before the age of 12, we don't make beta waves. So we don't even have any ability to make sense of and process experience and store it accordingly and be able to tell ourselves like, oh yeah, it was okay. That baseball didn't hit me in the head. You actually have a stronger survival response and frozen response or shock response. So it's really going back through is what you do is you go back through in an altered state and reprocess these experiences so that your nervous system resets again and goes back down to more a calmer, calm, cool, collected, competent, composed, like parasympathetic nervous system state, more theta waves. So you're staying in that alpha flow, not sympathetic nervous system state trauma response.
Years ago, I had a coach, Maria Simone, who heads up the No Limits Endurance Coaching, and this is at least 10 years ago, maybe longer. And we had a conversation, and I think I was training for Ironman Arizona at the time, and I recall her saying to me, and it's something that has hung with me since then, that stress is stress, that the body doesn't know that you're going through physical stress or that you're going through mental stress. It just knows something is stressful. Is that similar to what you're talking about here, that we're processing or not processing
Yeah.
physical and mental
Yeah.
trauma?
So, with the stress component, if we're framing it that way, it is that we produce cortisol. So, our brain has a little tiny pea sized organ in it called the amygdala. And so, mental or physical stress, it's triggered, and then it triggers the adrenals to produce cortisol. So, no matter what, we're producing that free radical cortisol, which is not healthy for us. And then it actually makes us more susceptible to cellular death and damage the more cortisol we have. And then we start talking about the more, so if you produce cortisol in a car accident or you see a car accident, because actually observing secondary trauma and so on, we react the same way. It's how we're encoded as humans, is that if someone else goes through something, we actually will have a trauma response as well, or stress response as well. But what happens then when we are storing the information that we're consuming every second of every day, it's as much as a encyclopedia every second of every day, we actually create a trauma memory network. So if it's a cortisol experience, mental or physical, every time there's another cortisol experience, we're storing it in this memory network so that our nervous system is hypervigilant and prepared that can happen again. So the more stress you endure, and that's, when we're talking about endurance athletics, when it comes to hitting your lactate threshold, that's highly stressful on the nervous system and is actually causing us harm, or would be one of those things, so it would ramp us up. And then when you're calling on all that cortisol, when you are racing, we're actually activating that whole trauma memory network. So our brain and body is actually going back through all of those negative experiences. And so that's how your reaction time and your speed start to decline. So you see these athletes that do like amazing, and then by the time they get to college, they're like burnout essentially. And that's why, because they just can't endure more stress. Your trauma reservoir is full. And so you need to go back through and reprocess these things and get the body to expel or release that shock.
So how important, we talk about this all the time, and I'm a huge proponent of recovery, right?
Mhm.
Like, you don't have to be the grind at all costs, 100% effort at 100% of the time, because what you're saying to me sounds like all I'm doing is building up this trauma. And
Yeah.
so, like, my rest day is Friday. I absolutely love it. But what do you tell athletes who come to you and they're like, never miss a Monday, or some of these things that we see on the internet that propel this idea that go hard all the time?
Yeah, well, and it's kind of like some of the coaches aren't trained enough either, right? So you start to get a lot of coaches that are like, hey, this is the way we've always done it. This is the way I've done it. And I've produced Olympians. that's the worst coach you can possibly have because they're not using science. And so something in my undergrad that was fascinating is that my coach, who's the exercise physiologist for the school that I went to, and very, very focused on using science, training smarter, not harder, right? And so when we were in high
Yes.
school, we won state, very small mountain town in Colorado. We went down to Denver and won state. We were great, all these things, but basically every single woman on my team ended up with stress fractures, eating disorders, lack of iron, like horrific things because our coach was overtraining us essentially. So a lot of us, like when the opportunity came to move on and go on to college and compete, no one wanted to. I mean, we were burnt out. We all had shin splints, stress fractures, all sorts of awful things going on. And he was training us. I mean, he was a math teacher. He was training us how his coach had trained him up in South Dakota 20 years ago. So it taught me a lot then stepping into the college setting where we were actually using science. So we were using the heart rate monitors. We were seeing when our heart rate was still elevated. We were seeing if we needed to take time off. We were cross training because you really don't want to be constantly doing the same motion over and over. That's how you're going to get overuse injuries, as well as incorporating yoga and actually stretching appropriately. That's another one of my biggest pet peeves, is that if you're not holding a stretch over a minute, you're actually activating your trauma response. So you're actually more susceptible to getting injured. So you see all these athletes, even at the highest level, and they're having them hold a stretch for 20 seconds. I'm like, what are they doing? Your Golgi tendon's not releasing, your stretch reflex is not calming, and your fight, flight, freeze mechanism or the midbrain is not relaxing. It's actually activating it more. So it's really using science. And what we know is science is that even just lifting 2 days a week, it's like, okay, you're going to maintain your gains. So it isn't about just pushing harder and pushing through pain. Pain's a signal something's wrong. You're never going to be able to sustain your athletic career by pushing through pain.
Yeah, we had Dr. Sandra Harrell, who's the swimmers doc on Instagram, talking about something very, very similar to that as she made her way through the ranks of swimming in as a youngster into the collegiate level, how it was swim, 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 and there was no actual let's go to the gym and lift and work on these muscles in different ways because the coaches were old school, shall we say. And so I want to ask you, like, how do you combat that? Like, how do you, Dr. Paige Roberts, combat the educational part in teaching people? Because nowadays you're not just going up against this idea of, well, this is how I did it 20 years ago, and so this is how we're going to do it today. But you're also now going up against the hackers, shall we say, right? Hack your way to success, hack your way to fitness, do these 7 things and you'll be super fit before you know it. We all know that that's not how you get there. You got to put the time in. You've got to eat right. You got to sleep. There's no hacking your way to success. So how do you combat all of these different things that are out there?
Talking about the literature and the science, I mean, you're going to find every single thing that you want to on Instagram or the internet, but it's really pulling peer-reviewed studies and talking about what is reality.
Right,
Like,
but people aren't going to do that, right?
oh,
So,
well,
so how do you take that peer-reviewed study that's probably 60, 70, 80 pages and make it so that the everyday athlete is like, I've got 10 seconds to focus on what Dr. Paige Roberts is saying. Like, how do you do that?
well, dispelling a little, like, okay, yeah, well, your coach, how far did your coach make it to sometimes? So, I mean, there's certainly looking at that and the reality of that, because you get a lot of coaches that didn't make it to a certain level. And it's kind of talking about the psychology of the push you down so you come back harder. And like, I'm going to treat you worse because you have talent. Like, none of that is reality. But yeah, just talking about the science of it and really talking about how no athlete's way to success is going to be the way that you're going to get to success. Everyone's journey is unique to them and their talents and their gifts, their body composition. I mean, even to the point of how many slow twitch, fast twitch muscle fibers someone has in certain areas of their body, how they feel when they're competing and performing. So it's really trying to give that education there, and really with the holistic health studies I've done with the doctorate studies is that it's actually looking at a more holistic, integrative in of like Eastern med and Ayurvedic medicine and in other areas, because I think that we get really lopsided with just one way of thinking when it comes to science or even just Western med kind of information.
You're
So,
asking the public to have an open mind. And if
yeah.
you open up any social media platform, that doesn't always happen now, does it?
No, it doesn't. My favorite study though, because what happens with athletes too. So we'll talk a little bit about fawning, right? So one of the trauma responses of trying to read your coach and read your parents or whoever, or even spectators, is to, did I perform well? Am I good enough? Am I okay? Was my performance okay? As athletes, you really learn to be very emotionally intelligent in a way, and kind of coherently and co-regulating, because our nervous system's energy begets energy. So like quantum physics principles are that when we're around someone else, our brainwaves sync and our heart rate variability syncs with someone else. So athletes get really good at being able to sense all the way from the middle of the baseball field if their coach is okay, right? If they're happy, if they're sad, if they're mad, and then that's going to dictate how they feel. And so it's actually a trauma response that athletes and in performers too, like musicians, actors, actresses, all the same thing. If you have your producer over here giving you bad looks and swearing in the background, it's going to impact you and freeze you, and you're going to not be able to perform optimally. So it's that kind of understanding that one, we need to disconnect from what other people think, for one, because everyone has an opinion and you can be the juiciest peach, but not everyone likes peaches. So that's what I'm telling my athletes. It's like, yeah, not everyone's going to like you, and that's okay, because you're
I
doing
love
this.
it.
Yeah, but it's like negativity, actually, we emit positive ions when we're being negative, which is bad for us. We want negative ions. Negative ions come from being on the beach, water, positive affirmations, nature, all these really healing things for us on the atom level. And but positivity, we emit negative ions, which are good for us. And you see this when you take the plant study, where you take one plant and there's all these negative things being played on a loudspeaker, and then you have the plant where there's positive things being said. Well, the plant is going to thrive with the positive. The plant is going to die with the negative. And so that's one of my favorite, like, basic things to talk to an athlete about, because over time, they're always looking for this criticism, because the coaches are saying bad stuff makes you better. Well, there's an aspect of neuromuscular technique, right? There's an aspect of actually executing and being able to play the sport and do what you need to do. But at a certain point in time, all that negativity is never going to make you better. That's just not how we work. And so it's actually them then start turning on themselves and constantly are out there. By about college is where I see this, late high school, college, of where they're just constantly picking themselves apart. So that negative self-talk thing starts. And it's just like, oh my gosh, so you start from this negative, then you're hurting your own self cellularly. And we say you're traumatizing your own brainstem, because all the negative things you're telling yourself are causing that trauma response, just like if someone negative was telling you that, or that mental stress and trauma. So we want to flip that around and give ourselves compliments all day. As goofy as it sounds, it actually works. And it actually is what we need on an atom level and a cellular level and a nervous system health level. So it's like the positive is what we need to be doing. But there's this other component of like that toxic positivity.
Yeah.
And what that looks like is discounting emotions and discounting experience. So there's this line where it's like, hey, we need to go back through the negative things and fully access what emotions were felt in that moment when that negative thing happened, where we're feeling it in our body and holding it in that fascia network. Because our fascia neural network, the fascia that holds the muscles, it's actually an emotional network. And so this is why, like, oftentimes people, you can have an emotional response when someone's giving you a massage, or you're working with a physical therapist and something's not getting better. It's because you're holding on to an emotion that's associated with that tautness in the fascia, which we know, it's Dr. Bruce Davis. I did some research with him up in Seattle, and that when we endure trauma, our fascia actually tightens, the dural motor sheath around the brain and the spine, and we go into like a torsion fighter stance. And so your range of motion is decreased. So that's all emotional. That's all midbrain.
It's funny that you bring up toxic positivity because I've had conversations in the past. Like, I am a positive person. That doesn't mean I don't get upset, doesn't mean I don't get angry, doesn't mean I don't get stressed. But I'm a positive person and I want to cheer. And I thought to myself, what is the public's perception? Are they going to perceive me as being toxically positive? And then I realized I can't worry about their perception of me. That's on them to figure out. I can't worry about them figuring it out because otherwise I'm just going to get stressed and anxious and I'm just going to continue to be a cheerleader and continue to root for people. And what I've seen is the positivity come back as opposed to the negative, right? Which is really cool because now, like, I want to go do more. I want to help more people. I want to cheer louder for people. And I think that has really, really helped. So I appreciate you bringing up toxic positivity. And I want to bring one other thing up.
Mm-hmm.
In today's world, we have access to data about everything. There is there's Strava that you can get feedback on from athletes giving you kudos on your run. There is the Aura Ring. There is Whoop, measuring your sleep, measuring your stress, measuring your recovery. If we're looking at these things that are giving us data, and then we get stressed out about the data and causing us trauma, are those actually helping us in that scenario? Or is there a way that we can just say, this data is cool, I'm going to use it as sort of like a guardrail, but I'm not going to be, fixated on it and only doing the things that the data is giving me?
That's what I would say. I mean, heart rate monitors when you're training is one thing to kind of know where you're at. Some of the wearables are interesting. I've seen differences between the Garmin and the Aura myself when I'm wearing them. So I find that kind of fascinating. So, and then I was one of the first to go wear Fit. I wore one of those for like 5 years when I first got it. I loved it out of undergrad. And after a certain point in time, you kind of know yourself and what that's going to look like. But really, it's your feelings, right? Like, so if you're feeling crappy and feeling grumpy and not feeling great, your legs are heavy, don't work out that day. You need a rest. It's just like, it's really your sensation and your feeling. And that's what's going to guide you, because there's no way pushing through some of that heavy tiredness is what your body needs.
Despite like for one of those wearables, right? Like I used to use a Whoop, I don't anymore, but it would tell you, like, I don't remember if it's recovery or energy or whatever the number is, right? And there would be days where it'd be in the red, which is like, don't do anything today.
Right.
But I'm looking at my training plan and I'm like, okay, I can go for a 2-hour run and I feel great.
Right.
And there would be days where it's green, which means go for it. And I'm like, man, I feel like crap. I'm going to go take an extra rest day. And so again, I think these things have to be taken with a grain of salt, shall we say, where it's good for guidance, but you can't become fixated on it. Otherwise, I would say you've got me fixated on this idea of mental stress and just accumulating that trauma. That if we're focused on that data that's constantly coming at us, we're going to build up a trauma response to that, because we're going to have a day where we feel great, but the data is telling us not to do anything, and so we skip, which can then cause more stress.
And you're starting to talk about cueing too, right? So we can cue positive or cue negative. And so everything's a cue to us. Like, we are creatures of pattern and habit. So yeah, you can be cueing the negative by doing that. And it's interesting because, when we talk in more kind of on the toxic positivity component of things, avoiding feelings and avoiding negative things and processing them and making sense of them is actually going to be what makes you more negative in life. You're going to start viewing things more negative, because we know that the more processing you do, when you go through these reprocessing, desensitization techniques, it increases the energy to the hippocampus and it decreases the energy to the amygdala. So it actually calms that cortisol. So you start to view things more positively if you actually are mindful and allow for full processing of emotions, ironically, right? So the hippocampus is kind of like, it's like a movie projector in your brain. So when you're taking in the frequency information with your eyes or all of your senses, it's actually showing the experience inside your brain. That's how you're processing it. And so the greater the energy to the hippocampus, the more positive you're going to be viewing things. So it's really interesting. So the less energy, it's going to go straight in, cortisol, bad. This is like other bad experiences. Therefore, we are going to ramp up cortisol, hypervigilance, fight, flight, freeze, suspect, negativity, believing the worst in people. I mean, it's really interesting how our brain begins to create our own reality in that way. And so that's why you see individuals that have had a lot of trauma end up utilizing a lot of substances and become addicts and so on, because they're perceiving their reality is just so uncomfortable and so overwhelming all of the time. So it's really interesting because, and I'll give you the example, and just for people out there, someone cuts you off in traffic. Instead of going, oh my gosh, that person's a blah, 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 and getting angry, instead, I want you to go back into your body. I want you to sit in that activation, heart racing, and sit there, go, wow, that was scary. It could have caused a wreck. That would have been bad for me. Oh, I'm just going to allow for this scary feeling. I'm going to notice it and access it in my body and let it work its way through. And that's just what we're talking about here when we're talking about processing experience and processing negative experience like that. It's really that simple.
That's a great example, and I'll give you another one. So earlier today, I had a 40-minute run on the schedule. From step one, I was like, this is not going to be a good run. Like, I just knew it, right? And I went through the process. I finished my run, and when I was done, I thought about what was it that caused this to be a bad run. And I realized, one, nutritionally, I ate like 3 or 4 hours beforehand and hadn't eaten up until that point again. And essentially, I wouldn't say it was fasted, but fasted, shall we say. And then I also know that we have a really important call as a company coming up in 2 days. And so that stress has been sitting there. And so instead of focusing on the bad run, I was like, okay, here are the things that didn't go right and how I can address those for the next time I go for a run or the next time I have to go out to do a swim or a ride, right? And able to turn the page. Mm-hmm. As opposed to fixating on, oh, it's such a bad run. I'm not as good of an athlete as I thought I was. My fitness isn't there. And all of those things that would continue to build up and create sort of that negative wall mm-hmm. that is now going to be harder to get through.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I love it. Yeah. And so like when it comes to just really being in tune with our feelings, which I know is not something that we are as a society, but the more that we allow for feelings, and even when it comes to the negative kind of frustration and anger, that actually means to like fully process frustration and anger, we must get to a point of the sadness and grief and resolve. So I use these sounds in my practice. They're binaural, bilateral sounds, right? So they drop you into the altered state in the subconscious mind so that we can access all the negative experiences that have happened to you, because they're really not in our frontal lobe so much as we don't go back through them consciously all of the time. Subconsciously, we are, like I said, when we have these physiological reactions. But it's really sitting in and listening to those sounds, being able to drop into the limbic brain or the deep brain where our emotional experience is, and going through something and actually looking at it and then getting to that grief and resolve. Because most of the time when we're angry, it has to do with like loss or disappointment or hurt or pain or high levels of stress. And if we can fully process the emotions, that full arc of the emotion, and get yourself to cry, that's like magic. That like resets the brain. We release cortisol in tears, and then it also populates the frontal lobe more so that we're not in the limbic as much when it comes to the negativity and in our emotions, essentially is what you'd say.
You got me thinking about this idea as athletes, right? We're told to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, right? Mm-hmm. And you have to go to do this interval work, and you have to push to your 5K or marathon tempo pace or whatever it is, right? You got to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. You were actually talking about that too, in this idea of being comfortable, getting uncomfortable and having conversations, and understanding your emotional IQ essentially, and getting in touch with our own selves, right? I think one of the things that we don't do enough in society today is talk to each other, mm-hmm. right? We use this phrase, I talked to Paige, when we really mean I texted Paige. Right. That's not talking. Whereas like even this, while we're having a conversation, we're still behind a screen. We're not actually like sitting across a table from each other, breaking bread and connecting with each other. And I think that's one of the things that we need to do more of so that we can then get comfortable with being uncomfortable and assessing our own emotional status. Would you agree?
Yes, absolutely. And so I'm finishing up this workbook. It's a companion workbook where you can actually take yourself through the process that I do with athletes on your own in a little different way, but it correlates with what the process is and multiple different mental shifts. And one of them is I want athletes to go out and have fun 1 day a week with their friends, families, go have fun. You know how hard it is to get like a USA athlete to go do that? But they need that, right? We need that. We are social beings. We need to have fun. We need to get away from the stressors, whether it be work or training or competition. It's really healing. And like when we laugh, it actually pops us into alpha brainwave. When we hum, it pops us into alpha brainwave. When we whistle, it pops us into alpha brainwave. When we smile, it pops us into alpha brainwave. So ways to hack your brainwaves to get an alpha flow. And one of the funniest things when you're talking to athletes about, hey, when you start to feel stressed out there in the field, I want you to smile. And they think like, what?
Yes.
How many athletes do you really see smiling out there?
Me. Like, I am that person. Like, I don't know anything about the science. The words doctor will never be in front of my name, but I can tell you this. When I'm in the midst of a 100-mile race, or even when I was racing Cocodona initially, 250 miles, like, I was like, you got to smile now, dude. Like, there's nobody else who gets this opportunity but you. Smile, and it just makes everything so much easier in that sense. And I guess the science tells me that I was doing it right. I think it's also why, like, when I pass people, whether I'm on a bike or whether I'm running, like, I smile and I wave to them. It makes me feel better. I don't know how they're receiving it, but I hope that them seeing me smile and wave and say hi gives them a positive reaction to it.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of science on, you know, how we try to find a human characteristics in everything we look at. You know, like people look at a cloud like, oh, it's a smiling person or something. It's actually a cue again for our nervous system for safety. So when people are smiling, yes, it's a cue for safety. It's like I said, when we do this fawning, trying to mind read our coaches and see what they're going to do and their reaction, it's the same kind of thing. I mean, we're like investigators when it comes to safety in our environment. So it's actually like, yeah, a really positive thing to smile, and then that person feels safe. And there's just all sorts of stuff going on. And that's why I like the coaches that are very focused on some of the positivity when it comes to before a game. And they, you know, you see the silly things. Some of the coaches are like, okay, we're going to dance, and we're going to listen to this music, and we're going to laugh, and we're going to have a good time. And then you see like the other countries in the corner, like all angry and like the stoic face and stuff. It's like, that's not helping them any. That's not helping them at all with their competition. So my advice to any coaches out there, if they're listening, it's like, you need to take your athletes right before comps and you need to have some fun. You need to do some break dancing and laughing, giggling, smiling, and pushing up that energy to that alpha brainwave prior.
I'll give you a story. I raced Ironman Louisville a number of years ago, maybe 2016. And for anybody who remembers racing at Ironman Louisville, because it's been discontinued, you actually have to wait in a line before you get into the water, because it's a drop-in time trial start for the swim.
Wow.
And I was with an athlete who we trained all summer together, and this was her first Ironman. And I could see in her face, I could see the worry, I could see the concern, I could see the anxiety, I could see the stress. And as we're sitting there, I just made this face. And she's like, what are you doing? And I looked at her and I said, Terry, I am peeing in my wetsuit right now, and it is the greatest feeling I've ever had. And that's exactly what her reaction was. She started laughing so hard, and she was like, thank you so much for breaking the tension. I feel so much better. I'm ready to race now. And I think that that's the point. Like, we as an endurance athletes, especially everyday athletes, we're not getting paid for this stuff. So don't be so hard on yourself. Like, let the stress go and have fun. Like, you get to do this. It's going to be a blast. Yes, it's going to be hard. Yes, it's going to take a long time, but you're going to figure out that you can do this stuff.
Right.
And that's all it matters. Whether you PR it, doesn't matter. Whether you come in, 152nd place, like, it doesn't matter. We're not getting paid for this stuff. So let's have some fun.
I know, and it is funny that you say let's have some fun, because when you tell an athlete that, they're just like, "What?" I'm like, "Just go out there and have fun. Just go out there and have fun." The last conversation I have with them before a comp, and they're just kind of like, "Okay," and it's like, no, like let's attach to what is fun about this sport for you. What is exciting? What is fun? And so when you start bringing back those things from the memory of when you first started sport, and what was fun about it. So it's that kind of remembering what is fun about it and not the stress.
We've been talking for a while, and I think we could talk for days about this, Paige. Before we jump into our rapid fire food questions, I do want to ask you this. Where can people get in touch with you? Where can they contact you so that they can start to have more fun and get comfortable with being uncomfortable with their emotional status?
Well, I'm at Sports Psych Page on every social platform. And then my website is robertsneurotraining.com. And I'm more responsive probably on the socials. So just DM me. I have people DM me alpha when I'm doing the call to action with people and when they're ready for this process. But I will say that I do about 10 sessions with an athlete, and that's about enough to reset your nervous system. So it's not one of those like, oh my gosh, I've had all this stuff. Am I ever going to get? It's like, no, it's like we can get you back to your default or where you were before all the stress and trauma in your life. And yeah, so that's my spiel.
10 sessions on average over how long of a period of time?
We do weekly. I've been able to, if someone has a big comp coming up or something, we might do twice a week, but it really takes the nervous system about a week to integrate things in. And it is an altered state process, but there's sounds. And I have people, they're on my website and you can buy them on there. They're like $22. They go to the sound healer that's magnificent and could create them out in Maui. But just even, I have you download those sounds for sessions, but those are a tool for you to use all the time. So anytime you feel any activation or upset, so anyone can just go there and download the sounds. But when you feel upset and activation, agitation, sadness, listening to those sounds allows for you to drop in and actually look at the experience and fully process the experience to be able to release it. We have to be in an subconscious altered state to fully process experience, because it's the supramental energy plane which dictates our which is basically our quantified field that we all have of atoms, so that's actually where we have to be to shift the nervous system. And so that's why a lot of these psychedelic modalities like ketamine and ayahuasca and mushrooms and all those things are effective, because it allows for that. But you can actually use sounds to get there. So you don't necessarily have to use substances to access these experiences and fully process them to allow for this positive outcome mentally and physically.
And people can work with you virtually as well as in person?
Yeah, I'm actually getting an in-person location here in I guess it's on the other side of the Santa Monica Mountains over by Calabasas at this point in time. But I have been doing the distance work for about 12 years now. So it's just as effective if you're not in the greater Los Angeles area. And I offer QEEG brain scans for the in-person. We do a assessment, then we do our sessions online if you're traveling, whatever, or live further out in LA. And then we'll do another assessment after 10 sessions. So you actually get to see how healthy your brain got, how more enhanced your reaction time is, and how much more voltage or beautiful energy flowing through your brain after you did all the hard work of the 10 sessions.
Awesome. So all of you listeners who are with us live, go check out Dr. Paige Roberts. For those of you who are catching this on the podcast, it'll be all in the notes where you can go find her. So are you ready for where I'm an expert in, which is in food? Are you ready for our rapid fire food questions on food?
Let's go.
Awesome. So pineapple on pizza, yay or nay?
Yeah.
Oh, come on. Really? We were having such a good conversation.
I love sweet and salty.
All right. So I will not block you, but I will put you in a timeout for 24 hours. Next up, are you a fan of Oreos?
No.
No? No Oreos whatsoever? Ever?
That's the worst fat you can put in your body.
I don't care. I only got one life to live, and I'm going to enjoy Oreos. Let me put it to you that way.
It's okay. You burn enough fat. You're good.
Licorice, red
Yeah.
or black or none at all?
Oh, black.
Black. So you're an anise fan. You like that anise flavor.
Yes.
So are you a fan of like fennel salads then too?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Fennel seeds is the anise. That's where the anise comes from. Peeps. Are Peeps a real candy or are they just marshmallow covered in glitter dust?
Marshmallow covered in glitter dust.
All right, we're back on track. You're gaining my confidence again. Candy corn. Is candy corn a real candy or is it just earwax covered in sugar?
It's just earwax covered in sugar.
Yes! Peanut butter or nut butter if you have allergies. So do you go creamy or crunchy?
Creamy.
Creamy, really? Why?
I just like creamy better.
Are you a fan of peanut butter and jelly sandwiches?
I will do peanut butter and jelly rice cake. I don't eat wheat.
Oh, you don't eat wheat. Okay.
No.
Well, then this question won't work because you can't really cut a rice cake. It's just going to explode on you when you bite into it anyhow. Is a hot dog a sandwich or is it a taco?
I would say a sandwich, but you don't need to be eating those things either, man.
I eat hot dogs all the time. They are fantastic. And anybody who tells me not to, absolutely blocked and reported. Absolutely love hot dogs.
When you're eating these things, just take some charcoal to bind some of the nastiness and you'll be okay.
I've been doing this stuff for 17 years. I'm 50 years old. I'm in perfect health. I'm not worried about eating Oreos and hot dogs. Trust me.
But actually being happy and exercising is why you are, because other people, if they're not exercising, they're not going to sustain.
The beauty is we are all an experiment of N equals 1.
We are.
And so if you're enjoying hot dogs, keep enjoying the hot dogs. So you put pineapple on pizza. Would you put pineapple on a burger or a chicken sandwich as well?
If I ate meat, I'd probably, yeah.
So you're a plant-based athlete then?
Yeah, I'll do a tiny bit of cheese here and there.
Yeah.
Not for some of the reasons people may think. My family were hunters and I was not going to eat Bambi. So
I quit eating meat about 12 or 13 years ago. But I eat cheese as well. So ice cream, cheese, like that stuff is in my diet. And I know before I eat it that it's going to cause me issues, but I love ice cream and I'm not getting rid of that. So I deal with it. It is what it is.
Just try organic. That's all I ask.
I don't worry about that stuff either. So we're coming up on fall. The people at Starbucks have already put out pumpkin spice. So are you a pumpkin spice or an apple cider person?
Oh, apple cider would be yeah.
Absolutely. I'm a huge apple cider fan. You can only eat one flavor for the rest of your life. Are you going savory or sweet?
Oh my gosh. Probably sweet.
Really?
Yeah.
Interesting. Why is that?
I like my fruit. I eat a lot of fruit. I do.
Yeah, nothing wrong with it. Chocolate chip cookie or oatmeal raisin cookie?
Oatmeal raisin.
Yes. That's a hot take in all honesty. Most people go right to chocolate chip.
Oh, no, the cinnamon, yeah.
Yeah. Oatmeal raisin's fantastic. My favorite cookie, as a matter of fact. You don't strike me as a Pop-Tarts person. Is that correct?
No.
Yeah. Pop-Tarts are awesome, people. Eat them. If you're carb loading, 68 grams of carbs. Enjoy them. You're going to go out and work it off anyway. Enjoy them.
Annie's makes them, and those are organic.
Favorite flavor of ice cream?
It would be like not healthy ones, like the bubble gum or like
who cares about healthy ice cream? It's ice cream. Eat it.
I know. It's like I'm like still a child. I like bubble gum or cotton candy.
Did you see our Food Fight Friday from this past week?
No.
By chance? So I posted Food Fight Friday on this past week, and the question was top 5 ballpark foods, and cotton candy was one of them. So if you go to a baseball game, are you ordering the cotton candy?
I mean, I would eat it. If I eat anything at a baseball, you know what I like? Dodgers has the soft serve ice cream and the little
Yeah,
light thing.
can't go wrong with soft serve ice cream, that's for sure. Do you eat candy bars or candy in general? Every now
I'll,
and again, maybe?
I'll do the Larabar peanut butter and chocolate. That's like
That's
a
not
candy bar.
candy.
It's so sweet. It's so good. It's just like the Reese's, people.
Yeah, that's not like getting a Snickers bar at the 7-Eleven.
If if I was going to eat a candy bar, it would be white chocolate Reese's.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to ask you this, even though you don't typically eat candy. We're coming up on Halloween here within the next 60 days, although all the candy is already starting to be put out in the grocery stores. Do you go grocery shopping for holiday specific candy? Like if you're handing out for Easter or excuse me, for Halloween or when Easter rolls around, or you're like, nah, I'm not interested in that stuff.
I love the Cadbury cream eggs. So that's
Really?
Easter. That is a kryptonite of mine. I always have to have at least a couple of those when those show up.
I'm not sure we could be more polar opposite right now. You like pineapple on pizza, you're eating the Cadbury cream egg. Like pineapple doesn't belong anywhere near pizza. And that if anybody gave me that Cadbury cream egg, I'm just throwing it straight in the garbage.
Well, the caramel ones are pretty good. Those are good too.
It's a visual thing for me. Like this
Really?
idea of the chocolate breaking open and seeing like an egg yolk. Like I can't get past the idea of the egg yolk in that thing. I'm out.
I know, and I don't eat eggs. I'm actually allergic to them. I tried to eat eggs because the protein component back when, and then I was like, oh, I'm actually allergic. Isn't that interesting?
That is interesting. Do you enjoy brownies? And this will be our last question.
Yeah.
Do you enjoy coffee?
Oh, yeah. Dark
Okay.
organic coffee every day.
Excellent. Fantastic. So with brownies, if they're coming out of the oven and they're sitting on the counter and you're looking around, family members, you're trying to sneak one in before the rest of the family gets to them, are you going for the corner edge or are you going for the center ooey gooey?
Ooh. I mean, when they're hot, the corner edge, but if they're cold, the center.
I love it. Okay. Now you get to put ice cream on it. Is there a flavor of ice cream that you want to put on top of your brownie that's going to make it immaculate for you?
Oh, probably like a caramel swirl. Like,
Oh, that's good.
yeah.
Yeah. So here's what I tell everybody at the end of our show. My favorite way to eat a brownie is to drop it into a coffee mug and add a scoop of coffee ice cream to it so that as you're eating it, it's a mocha. And then before you know it, the ice cream melts and you've got yourself an affogato and it can't be beat.
I was going to say in Greece, they had a lot of the, with the coffee and yeah.
How do you take your coffee? This was the question I asked the other day. When you go to order it, what do you get?
Black, dark.
That's it. Straight up black, which I'm a huge fan of too.
I love it. I do the press. It's my, yeah.
You have a French press?
Yep.
Yeah. It's hard to beat. Like we have an espresso machine and it's fantastic, but I do pour over virtually every day. Can't go wrong.
Coffee's good for you.
Yeah, I agree. You're not going to get an argument from me. That might have saved you to get you back on our show in the future.
Amazing.
Dr. Paige Roberts, thank you so much for joining us. Your information is phenomenal. For those of you who are just joining the show now, Dr. Paige Roberts has an article on our website. Go check it out, runtrymag.com. We've got 2 more articles coming up from her, and she's going to share her expertise on how we can get better at endurance sports through our own brains.
Yeah.
Dr. Roberts, thank you so much. Have a great evening.
Yes.